Hello everyone, this is Deepak Gupta from Sourcing Hardware in conversation with architect Shamit Manchanda. I am very honored to introduce Shamit Manchanda. Shamit graduated from the School of Planning and Architecture in 1989, and he is now partner and the chief healthcare architect at Manchanda Associates, an architecture firm that specializes in healthcare architecture. In addition to that, he is also chairperson of the Indian Institute of Architects Northern Chapter. As a specialist in architecture for healthcare sector, he has under his belt a number of prestigious projects, such as the 300-bedded specialty block and 200-bedded trauma block for Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences in Hyderabad, the 500-bed teaching hospital at Tejpur in Assam, 250-bed maternity and child blocks for the government of Delhi, and a state-of-the-art Center for Excellence in Transfusion Medicine for NACO under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Shamit wears a number of other hats as well. He's also a member of the Building Construction Practices Sectional Committee CD 13 of the Bureau of Indian Standards, which reviews standards pertaining to building products. In addition, he is member of the Central Vista Committee, which is a special advisory group for development of the Central Vista and the Central Secretariat complex that's coming up in New Delhi. He has also served as member of the governing council of the School of Planning and Architecture, his alma mater, during 2009 to 2014. So Shamit, welcome to this Conversations with Deepak. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I'm sure I'm going to enjoy this conversation.
Thank you, Deepak ji, for inviting me for this chat with you. It's an honor to be there on the platform of Sourcing Hardware. I hope I make sense in whatever I convey today.
Thank you indeed. So in view of your specialization, professional specialization, and the experience that you've gained, the rich experience, most of my questions are going to be focused on the healthcare sector. Also, considering that we are all surrounded by the coronavirus, I think it's the healthcare sector that is going to really save us, and it's the sector that's going to be strengthened by all the powers that be. And that's why any discussion on healthcare is very important, very relevant. So let me start by asking, how does healthcare architecture in India compare with that of developed countries?
Healthcare in India is a mixed bag. On one hand, we have government hospitals where the focus is to provide basic healthcare to all. Right. And on the other hand, we have the Apollos, Fortis, Medantas with world-class JCI compliant hospitals providing the best healthcare in the world, comparable to anywhere in the world. So in terms of architectural designs and materials, the same mixed bag is reflected. In terms of architectural designing, the number of firms specializing exclusively in healthcare architecture is very limited. Fortunately, the scenario is changing, and there are some architectural schools who have started offering a master's degree course in healthcare facility planning. So it's a mixed bag. We have the most basic healthcare infrastructure available, right from the villages to the most modern facilities. And with the Ayushman Bharat coming in and the focus of creating health and wellness centers all over the country, things are bound to improve.
Right. But which are the areas, improvements as you're saying, which are the areas where the industry, the healthcare industry can improve rapidly in terms of, say, design, architecture, and materials?
So the scope is unlimited. As I said, on one hand, we have the basic infrastructure being provided. The aim of the government is to provide basic infrastructure, basic healthcare to everybody. So from that end to a JCI compliant, internationally accepted healthcare, the scope is very wide. When we are talking about basic healthcare infrastructure in the villages and small towns, uh, better planned facilities, better use of materials, uh, better use of design in implementing those materials can improve these facilities a lot. We are not the government is not into the process of making fancy facilities at the basic level. There, the focus is providing basic healthcare. Uh, and the world-class facilities, you have the best research facilities in terms of AIIMS, which a number of them have now opened all over the country. So you have, even in the government, you have the best healthcare facilities, and in the private, you have these JCI compliant facilities.
So, but in terms of improvement, are there any specifics that you could point out that this is where some work needs to be done?
The facilities need to be better designed and planned, which the government is doing. They are creating prototypes for these health and wellness centers, which are small units, which used to be called the primary healthcare center earlier, now which is being termed as the health and wellness centers. So design is an important thing. Availability of good material, which does not require much maintenance, is important. So those things are there, yes.
Are there any materials which you might have seen in other developed countries which you feel should be brought in over here, used?
There are a lot of materials, and those materials are available in India also. But the problem has been in terms of costs. You have a widely accepted material like the antimicrobial copper surfaces. Now, using it is an expensive proposition. Everybody knows copper is antimicrobial and it helps in preventing of spread of infection. But every time you suggested it, the cost was so huge that people backed out. In terms of paints, you have antibacterial and antifungal paints which can be used. You have, in terms of air conditioning, you have these PHIO and the UVGI, ultraviolet germicidal irradiation devices, which can be put inside the air conditioning systems, which act as trap and kill for these infectious diseases. So these technologies have been around, but the cost has been a big factor in them not getting adopted. And with the focus coming on infection control, and the use will increase, so hopefully the industry will be able to bring down these costs.
Okay. In view of the ongoing pandemic, when the healthcare sector is under pressure to, add more facilities, perhaps built up separate isolation centers and all, what infrastructure requirements do you visualize are going to be required in the coming few months at least?
Look, pandemics like this have a cycle of about 100 years. The last pandemic, as everybody is talking about, is the Spanish flu in 1918. But if it is proven that this was a man-made virus, and the chances of such outbreaks are going to go up. So we have to be prepared. And this pandemic did expose our preparedness to handle such a situation. Going forward, we need to relook at how our health facilities can be designed so that they can easily adapt themselves for the requirements of such an infectious disease. Even more emphasis will have to be given on infection control, both in terms of physical planning and the more importantly, as I told you, about devices which can be used in the air conditioning design. And as you rightly said, recently the government has highlighted the need for setting up isolation wards and proper labs at every district level. So the requirement has been, at the moment, the biggest problem has been that it is either a COVID hospital or a non-COVID hospital. So we need to design such that it can be run as both a COVID and a non-COVID hospital. All major COVID hospitals have had to shut down all their other departments so that they can concentrate only on COVID cases. Not only concentrate, the infection does not spread from the people who are infected with COVID. It goes on to the people who are not infected with COVID. So those kind of requirements will have to be set. And as I said, we need to be able to adapt these facilities so that they can be used as COVID facilities, because in terms of air conditioning, you have to have negative pressure areas. Normally, you do not require to have negative pressure. So we build in systems that easily we can convert a positive pressure area into a negative pressure area. So that can be built into the air conditioning system. Large areas will have to have triaging facilities in terms of how do you segregate people who are positive and who are not positive. So those kind of infrastructural requirements will have to be there.
Areas where people come for testing, for instance.
Yes.
There also some crowd is likely to.
Yes. So in terms of, as I said, the moment you come into any facility, be it testing or healthcare facility where you are going to be admitted to that place, the first instance is screening of a patient before he is admitted into the hospital or the testing center. So that the infection does not, if somebody who is positive comes in, the infection does not spread to others. So that what is called triaging. Triaging is basically segregation of these people if he is COVID positive or if he is not COVID positive. So those kind of facilities have to be made.
But if the same building was to be used for COVID and non-COVID treatments, different floors, definitely. What challenges are there? I mean, is it only limited to the air conditioning and the spread of the germ, or some other challenges also?
So initially the thought was, as you said, that can we have it on different floors? That is not a right attitude to have it, because you are using the same set of lifts, same set of staircases, same set of common facilities. So the emphasis why these COVID and non-COVID hospitals got created was because you could not segregate it on a floor-to-floor basis. You needed to either have a building which was COVID or non-COVID. So, and if you look at the announcement a few days back on the emphasis of a separate block for infectious diseases, the reason is that a separate block means it can be cut off from the rest of the hospital. So it is not an ideal situation to have a floor-wise segregation, but it will be much better to have a segregation in terms of one building to another building. So there's a connecting corridor, because a hospital setup or even a COVID isolation facility requires a lot of other paraphernalia support services, be it air conditioning, be it laundry, be it kitchen, be it biomedical waste management. So you cannot have an isolation ward without these facilities. So it will have to be in the same campus, but
separate,
possible to segregate it at when the requirement comes.
So in that case, is it advisable to have COVID hospitals in residential areas or near residential areas?
Definitely not.
Because the government seems to be contemplating, at least the Delhi government is, to add capacity, they are designating some of the private hospitals as COVID hospitals.
Those are larger, where the government is doing it, those are larger hospital facilities which are being built on hospital plots, not like nursing homes or small facilities in residential areas.
It is being done.
So be it a Max or be it an Apollo or be it Medanta or such facilities. So these are dedicated hospital facilities they are thinking of taking over.
Because we have come across some such instances where in residential, they are residential plots. So they are obviously not large hospitals. They are nursing homes or more elaborate nursing homes that have been designated as.
I have not personally come across such a thing. And at a personal level, I don't think it would be an advisable thing to do it, because segregation would not be possible. Easy segregation and control of air conditioning would not be possible.
Do you know of instances where the healthcare industry has revamped or upgraded or added to its infrastructure? At least the private hospitals, for instance. What are they doing?
Most of the facilities have been in terms of segregation. At the end of the day, you require, the statistics are that out of 100 people, 40% of the people will be totally asymptomatic. They would not even come to know about it. The next 40% would come to know about it, but would not even require healthcare facilities to be moved into. It is the last 20% which require this healthcare hospitalization, and within this 20%, only 5% would require ICU support. So in terms of government facilities, because operations are not happening as many as they used to, because all elective surgeries have been put off, they are converting operation theaters into ICUs, because the air conditioning requirement and the requirement of providing medical gases in terms of oxygen and other MGSS supplies, etc., are already built into an ICU. So those kind of things are happening.
But do you expect the government or the regulator, for instance, the National Accreditation Board of Hospitals and Healthcare, NABH, or the IPHS, do you think they are going to revise some of their guidelines?
Look, for even the medical regulator, it's an evolving situation. What is called the National Center for Disease Control, NCDC, Ministry of Health, has issued basic guidelines for setting up isolation wards. So that has already come out. And as the government has announced setting up of infectious disease ward blocks in all districts. So those kind of movements are happening. But besides these, these regulators having a rethink, even we will have to do a rethink in terms of how we design our hospitals. Right from, as I said, creating triaging facilities or for incoming patients, or creating isolation wings and wards so that they can be segregated at times of need. Because you also have to keep in mind that running a negative pressure facility is like running a hospital in which air conditioning is 100% fresh air. The cost of running it all the time is prohibitive. So you cannot have a complete isolation facility without having the requirement for it. So you have to have systems which can easily adopt themselves and change over when the requirement comes for a pandemic or an epidemic situation like this.
So going forward, what would you seek from the building materials industry in terms of technologies, though we have already touched upon that earlier, as well as the way they come up with solutions in terms of innovations, or the speed with which they are able to respond or supply? So what is expected of the building materials industry going forward?
So a few things we touched upon earlier, like use of antimicrobial copper or antibacterial paints, fungal paints, seamless floorings, etc. Uh, we need to do more research in terms of how to create surfaces which are more apt at controlling spread of infection. So we need to have research in that. And the second is bringing down the cost, because technology is there, materials are there. Our pain point has been the cost. So whenever we go to a client, we suggest a certain material and the cost is prohibitive, he's reluctant to use it. Till the time this pandemic came, nobody was thinking in terms of infection control to that much of an extent. Infection control has been important, but it has not been a prime focus. So it has now that, because that infection control is going to be a prime focus and such materials are going to be used, we need to have the building industry respond in terms of costing of these materials. Plus, more and more research will obviously be more helpful.
Public washrooms is one area where chances of infection as well as the spread of the germ probability is very high. So yes, how would you like public washrooms to be designed?
So again, going back to similar things, using antimicrobial copper surfaces, touch surfaces and handles, push bars, use of sensor operated taps, use of sensor operated doors, more use of when the public washroom is not occupied, methods of decontaminating them in terms of using with UV lights or other systems. The other decontaminants are already there in terms of soap, and alcohol based decontaminants are already there. So in terms of technology, as I said, all the sensor operated stuff can very easily help reduce the spread of infection.
I see. So moving on to some other subjects, some of which in which you are also very deeply involved, for instance, the Central Vista. There have been a diverse set of opinions about the need for the Vista as well as the design that is being proposed, and the cost, the environmental cost that might be there. So how do we build a consensus to around these issues?
Okay, just a small technical correction. I was a member till recently. There was some restructuring that happened. I am not on the Central Vista committee at the moment, though the Indian Institute of Architects still retains 2 seats on the committee. I am in touch with the people. There is a representative from the IIA head office and the IIA Northern chapter also on the Central Vista committee. Having said that, Central Vista is going to be one of the most important public projects of this country. And because it signifies the vibrant Indian democracy, IIA has always maintained that it is the prerogative of the government to undertake the project or not. It's the government's decision. It's all right. We have been talking about the process that should have been followed, be it in the appointment of the consultant or the lack of studies that have been done for this project, how it will affect the environment, the traffic, the urban character of the area. So those have been our main concerns. We have advocated that it should have been a 2-stage design competition. First stage, where an urban design exercise should have been done. And then in the second stage, the individual building should have been designed. Proper impact study should have been undertaken and put in the public domain. This is where the pain point of the public has been. The transparency has been lacking. Public consultations should have been done. They should have not treated this project like any other project, where the lowest bidder was awarded the work. This should have been a the best design should have been selected on merit. I'm not saying that the present architect is not capable of it, but that process was not followed.
So what is the scope of this project? How large is it, and does it entail?
Look, it entails right from repurposing the north-south blocks and the present parliament building. It talks about creating a new parliament building, and it talks about removing all the offices on both sides of Rajpath. It also involves doing away with some public buildings in terms of the National Museum, the Indira Gandhi Center for Arts, and other buildings that were meant for public use. So all those will get demolished, and new office blocks will come up on both the sides. It is slated to be about 20,000 crores, and which everybody is talking is today is that can we afford to have that expenditure done at this stage or not, especially with the pandemic around and the cost that the economy is going to bear.
But in terms of the impact assessment, what are the key concerns there? What likely impact is being visualized?
There is, of course, an environmental impact. Then there is a number of trees are going to be cut. How are we going to replenish that? Those are 50 years, 100-year-old trees are there. The traffic is going to be hugely impacted. As one report suggested, there are about 35,000 people working there, and the proposal is to bring in 70,000 people into this area. How those people are going to be brought in and brought out, taken out every day from that area. The metro system is already overcrowded if you have ever been onto that line. The urban character, how it is going to respond, are we going to... So there is a lack of clarity in terms of the design has not been shared with the public. There have been a few consultations, but within very closed groups.
So is the government looking into the issues that have been raised by IIA and other concerned bodies?
Unfortunately not.
Okay. We hope that better sense prevails and there is more meeting of minds.
Yes, exactly.
You have been involved, besides your studies or after graduation, you've been involved with the SPA as member of the governing council. So what gaps have you observed between academics and practice? And what changes would you like to see?
Look, schools, not talking about SPA as such, I'm just going to talk on general education and the kind of students that are coming out. So there is a widening gap between the architectural students, what they are learning and what they should be learning from the industry point of view. Leave aside a few handful schools, the industry finds it very difficult to train these when these students come for training or they join as freshers in our offices. It's very difficult because we find that they're not even trained properly in basic architecture. And on the other hand, the students complain that they are not taught what the industry expects from them. So there is this huge gap which is there, and primarily it is being fueled by a lot of these schools which have come up. There are 450 odd plus schools all over the country, and more than 20,000 architects coming out every year. The problem has been the lack of faculty available in these colleges. So this has been a problem. And from an IIA perspective, we have been trying to engage with schools and practicing architects so that this gap can be reduced.
Is there a need for industry interface where architects, before they graduate?
Yes, yeah. So there is a training, training period which students have to undergo. And so that does help a little, but it is not helping as much as, because the number of practices is not as many as the number of students that are graduating every year.
No, but how about the students being trained in the building sector, for instance?
No, they have, the students, when they are studying architecture, they have to be trained in terms of how they will be working as architects. So each student has to go in for a 9-month or 6-month training, depending on the school which he is in, before he graduates. So that is built into the system.
Okay. So are there any specific proposals that IIA has made of late in this regard?
So there was this training which used to happen after the 4th year. We have talked about it, and the council has now agreed that the training should happen after 3.5 years, 6 months training. So as I said, 6 months and 9 months, that changeover period is still happening. And that has been accepted. It's not just an IIA initiative, it's a complete, the whole industry feels that it should be like this. Another thing that had happened was there were admission was being given to non-science graduates due to various reasons. So, and science plays a very important role in the building industry because of be it the structural designing that we are exposed to, or the use of materials, etc. So the necessity of having taken science at the 11th and 12th level has been brought back.
Okay. Other than this, as chairperson of IIA Northern Chapter, what are the significant issues that you have faced or are currently facing?
IIA is the oldest body of architects in the country. In 2017, we celebrated 100 years of existence. So it's more than a 100-year-old body. Prior to the enactment of the Architects Act in 1972, IIA was the only main body of architects. And the Council of Architecture, which is the regulator, was formed out of IIA. So primarily there are two bodies, the Council of Architecture, which is the regulator, and the Indian Institute of Architects, which is the fraternity of architects. IIA, the council works in the interest of the general public, and IIA, being a fraternity, looks after the interests of the architects. For those who are not members, I would strongly urge them to become members, because becoming a member of IIA is not a mandatory requirement. To register with the council, it is essential to call yourself an architect. And because I urge everybody, because for larger the body, the more strength we have for the body, be it in engaging with the government in terms of issues of bylaws, how works are awarded to the public sector, in the public sector, or at the moment the discussion going on is the amendment to the Architects Act, which is long overdue, or to dealing with subjects like the Central Vista. So these are issues that are taken up at IIA, and our main concern is the larger the body, more strength we have when we talk to the government.
Okay. Well, I hope that your challenges, that the missions that you have for yourself are achieved, accomplished, and the pandemic also, comes under control, or through the scientific planning that the government as well as the architects are doing. In fact, there is a thought that going forward, buildings should be designed to handle pandemics, the residential buildings and the office buildings.
Yes. So as I said, the need is to even change our building bylaws in terms of how we plan individual buildings. In terms of office buildings or say hostels, etc., maybe introduction of a stretcher lift in every building, so that in case a building has to be repurposed for use of a pandemic hospital or an isolation ward, it can be easily done. In terms of residential planning, we might even think of going in for maybe a small decontamination zone before you enter the house, where you can change and have a bath before you enter the house. Because if this thing doesn't go away, we are going to be living with it for a very long time. So maybe how we design houses, our own residences, how we design our public buildings, because if you observe all over the world, you have convention centers and halls, etc., being converted into isolation wards. As I said, they require basic infrastructure. Those patients need to be just isolated. They do not require any amount of great intervention in terms of medical inputs. They just need to be kept under observation and they need to be kept isolated.
Well, Shamit, thanks a lot for all the insights that you've shared. And I wish you all success in your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Deepakji.
And it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Same here. Thank you.
Have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you.